Northern Ireland is a place currently suffering from the traumatic footprints or echoes or remnants or leftovers from what was called the Troubles in Northern Ireland. How would the term schooling by apartheid land with you?
Yeah, because that's essentially what it was. But it wasn't just schooling.
So the Troubles were a 40-year period where there was violence, bombing, segregation, separation, that people had to live under constant fear, live in a state of constant heightened awareness.
I'll never forget the first time I went to Belfast by myself at the age of, I think I was 17, 18. And I'd got off the bus and I was walking through a part of Belfast, and all of a sudden there were Union Jacks painted on the curbstones along the side of the road, red, white, and blue everywhere. There was big murals of King Billy, and I was shit scared, for want of a better word. This is not an area that I would be safe in if somebody asked me, "What's your name? Where are you from?"
What was the fear? What did you fear would happen?
I'd be beaten, shot, killed. It was as extreme as that. There was nothing else. I knew I was in the wrong place.
And we're recognizing that the aftermath of that is huge. It's really, really big. It's having a big impact on our community, the community of the north of Ireland today.
In the context of the north of Ireland, there's so many stories that are undercurrents of beliefs for people. And there's so much of "I'm not wanted" on both sides of the community. It's much more larger than both sides of the community. But there's this "I'm not wanted, there's something wrong with me." Neither side belongs anywhere, or have been fighting, still are fighting in different ways to belong somewhere. But nobody really knows what it is that they're fighting for.
I can feel that tension in my body right now. And I can feel that in my stomach. And maybe because you're reminding me of, experiences that I can totally relate to.
Or you ask somebody where they're from, you'll figure out whether they're Protestant or Catholic, nationalist, unionist, safe or not safe.
More than 90% of schools in Northern Ireland are still segregated by religion. So this is in 2024 that over 90% of our schools still have children separated by religion. Catholics and Protestants are educated separately from the age of 4 right through to the age of 18. Mental health problems are the single largest cause of ill health and disability in Northern Ireland. 1 in 5 adults in Northern Ireland has experienced a mental health problem. And prior to the pandemic, 1 in 8 children had an emotional difficulty indicating psychological distress. We talked recently about the idea of things that you were taught and things that you caught. And I know from a very, very, very early age that we just knew. You just knew where to go, where not to go, what to say, what not to say, how to look, what not to look, who to look at, who not to look at. That level of vigilance that we lived with. You said a certain level of vigilance. For me, that was all the time. An estimated 39% of the study population from the report undertaken by Queen's University have experienced a conflict-related traumatic event.
And you see the moment with time when they let go of that and they laughed and smiled like the little boys that they were. That was the goal for me. But that's the moment where you say, your nervous system is now settled. There's nothing like laughter to know that you're regulated and you're in the present moment. And that's what we were creating with these young boys. But we didn't know the jargon that there is today. But it was happening.
So, given what's happening in the north of Ireland right now, and given its relationship to a hugely traumatic past, we think it's important to have this conversation. I hope you enjoy the conversation that Stephen and I have, and thank you for tuning in to The Gift of Trauma from Compassionate Inquiry. So I am really, really delighted to have a friend and colleague on the show, Mr. Stephen Brown. Stephen, you're really welcome.
Thanks, Gavin. It's good to be here.
And, we're going to talk about the north of Ireland, trauma, your stories, what that means to you, how that's informed the work that you do and where you are right now. And Stephen, rather than me introduce you, I wonder how you would feel about introducing yourself in whatever form works for you, as long or as short.
Where to begin? I suppose, yes, I'm from the north of Ireland, also referred to as Northern Ireland. Contentious area, lots of different names for the same little piece of land. I'm an adoptee from birth, which is an important aspect, I suppose, of things that you're asking about in terms of what got me to where I'm doing what I'm doing today. And I grew up in Strabane in the north, which is predominantly Catholic nationalist area. Went to Catholic primary school, went to mixed secondary school for 5 years, then went back to Catholic secondary school for the final 2 years. And I've done a lot of work with community work, with two sides of the community. There are many others, but the two sides of the community, predominantly Catholics, Protestants, nationalists, unionists, loyalists, working with marginalized young people at risk. And for many years, doing a lot of work with probation board, using a lot of outdoor activities, experiential learning for personal development. And these days I live in County Down. Most of my adult life I've actually lived in County Down. And live here with my partner and two girls and work with people using compassion inquiry as well as somatic experiencing, internal family systems and Gestalt, and still using experiential activities such as fire walking and getting out in nature, being in cold water and then some. So yeah, a bit of a lowdown there.
Thank you, Stephen. So, Stephen, already in that introducing of yourself and a little bit about the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, the idea of Catholic school, you used mixed school, then back to Catholic school. And, already we're dropping into jargon from where we're from that I imagine a lot of people will have no idea what we're talking about. So, I'd really like to get into your north of Ireland, what it was like for you. But in your words, tell me a little bit, explain to me how you might help people understand why did you say, and I say, the north of Ireland? Why might someone else say Northern Ireland? What did you mean by mixed school? Explain to me a little bit about that from your point of view.
Well, I'm smiling now. This is a really big question to try and answer, and there are opposing ideas and thoughts around this. So, if we think about the island of Ireland and its relationship with England, the United Kingdom, and so on, it has been an area that has had lots of conflict for hundreds and hundreds of years. And if we sort of zip forward to more modern day, and I'm talking maybe going back now about 80 years to the conflict, which was around in the 60s and the 70s, and I'm a child of the 70s. What that meant for me was, on some level, Protestants are bad, Catholics are good. And what that was breaking down to was the nationalists were the Catholics, the loyalists, the unionists were the Protestants. And it was that level of sectarianism. Now, my mum and dad didn't want us to grow up with such a polarized view of the world, which is why we ended up going to my brothers and sisters who were all younger than me. We all went to a school which was for Catholics and for Protestants. It was also for boys and girls, which was also not particularly common
Hmm.
then either, because usually you had all boys schools and all girls schools. So we had gone, that's what I mean by a mixed school, not so much about boys and girls, but actually Protestants and Catholics. That said, although Catholics were at that school, we were maybe 5%,
Okay.
maximum 10%, but we were a small percentage in the school. I don't know the exact numbers. What I do know for certain is in my year group, where there was maybe about 90 pupils, I only knew of one other Catholic.
Okay. So this is a schooling system for young people, and I'm going to say something really big right now, and I'm aware of that. How would the term schooling by apartheid land with you?
Yeah, because that's essentially what it was. But it wasn't just schooling. It was where you worked, where you were able to work. It was about where you lived. It was about where you could walk and have a sense of safety, know that you would be okay. We were a country divided, or a part of a country that was divided. I'll never forget the first time I went to Belfast by myself at the age of, I think I was 17, 18. And I'd got off the bus and I was walking through a part of Belfast, and all of a sudden there were Union Jacks painted on the curbstones along the side of the road, red, white, and blue everywhere. There was big murals of King Billy, and I was shit scared, for want of a better word, because I knew this is not an area that I would be safe in if somebody asked me, "What's your name? Where are you from?" Because the minute that I would Stephen Brown, I would get away with that, would be quite neutral. But the minute I would have said I was from Strabane, I would have been marked straight away. You're a Catholic. And I was in an area where it was not okay for Catholics to be.
So I just want to explain very briefly, Stephen. Again, I'm conscious of listeners. So this idea of curbstones and roads and the end of buildings and flags, you mentioned Union Jacks painted red, white, and blue. This is essentially tribal marking. So this is areas in cities and towns and villages that would be marked with these very visibly marked with these colors, demonstrating their which side their allegiance lay on. And you being a Catholic child, young boy, 17, knowing that you were in the wrong area because of the colors that are painted on the street. What was the fear? What did you fear would happen?
I'd be beaten, shot, killed.
Okay.
It was as extreme as that. There was nothing else. I knew I was in the wrong place.
Mm.
And on the flip side, in the hometown that I was born, you would have the opposite. You would have had the Irish flag painted on carving stones, green, white, and gold. You would have murals to the IRA and so on, and the INLA. And so somebody from a Protestant community knew that they wouldn't be safe there. And then interestingly, the mixed school that I went to was on the outskirts of the town that I lived, and we were not allowed to walk to school, because if we walked to school, there was a good chance that something bad would happen to us. So because of the area that it went through a very nationalist area. So that meant that peoples had to take buses, and often buses were stoned. So people on the side of the road would throw stones at the buses, and this is for kids just going to school. They'd be throwing stones at the buses, or school. It was a regular occurrence for bomb scares, where the school would be evacuated. So for me, it wasn't quite easy getting to school, and actually, fortunately, mum and dad were able to drive us up and down to school. So it was very much a life or death sensation that would have been happening. I wouldn't have known about the nervous system, but I was scared. when I realized that I was somewhere where I shouldn't be.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm realizing, I can feel that tension in my body right now. And I can feel that in my stomach. And maybe because you're reminding me of, experiences that I can totally relate to. Tell me a little bit about how was that for a young person and how was that for a young boy moving about, through this mass of tribal color. You're in the right place, you're in the wrong place, on your way to school, coming home from school, where you went and played as a kid, where you played football, which shop you went to, which disco you went to, etc., etc. How was that? How did you move through that situation, those experiences?
Well, I can only remember what what it might have been like.
Sure.
There certainly would have been a lot of confusion because I was in one level, Catholic, growing up in a Catholic town, but also mixing with the Protestant community in secondary school. And then how do you find your place there in that community? And then also having the community which is outside of school, and how do you find your place there? Because certainly the idea of somebody from the town going to that particular school was, well, it wasn't very common. And so it also put you at risk in different ways from people who are like, you shouldn't be going there. You should be going to St. Coleman's. That's the Catholic school. So in a way, as much as mum and dad were doing everything they could do to create some sort of integration, it also had, I would say, costs, but I never had an experience physically did come as a cost, but there was still this level of being careful, what's okay and what's not okay. So I would say there was confusion and also a level of vigilance required throughout that. I always remember being asked one time by someone, an adult, and I would have only been, I don't know, 8 or 9, and I was asked, who are the good guys, the police or the IRA? And I don't know how I knew, but my answer was the IRA. That's what came out. And that was the right answer for that
Yeah.
person. And maybe I had some intuition already then of knowing what's the right thing to say to somebody to make sure it keeps them right. So I've no idea, but I always remember that at such a young age, because I certainly didn't recall or have the ability to call on I learned this from the news or I learned it from here, but somehow it was already there. The police are not the
Yeah.
good guys, the IRA are the good guys.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And when we're thinking about the people that are listening, Stephen, and the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, they were and this is it's way too general to, but it's probably the best we can do. They were the army, the defenders of the nationalists, the Irish people, the Catholics. So they kind of fell on that side. And to the other people, they were the terrorists. And then we had other organizations that use acronyms as well, the UDA and the UVF, which were the Ulster Volunteer Force, and the Ulster Defence Association were the defenders of this other side. I'm really keen, Stephen, to just lean in a little bit more about this idea of vigilance. You said, it was inbuilt. We talked recently about the idea of things that you were taught and things that you caught. And I know from a very, very, very early age that we just knew. You just knew where to go, where not to go, what to say, what not to say, how to look, what not to look, who to look at, who not to look at. That level of vigilance that we lived with. You said a certain level of vigilance. For me, that was all the time. Every street you were going to go to, when you got a little bit older, every social event, every bar, every pub, you just knew. Talk to me about living with that knowing.
Well, I don't know if I can speak so much about it as a personal experience as a kid or as a teenager, but I'll share a story with you. I was about 19 or 20, and I was, as I said, I was working with young people at risk, and I was asked to do a single identity workshop for a weekend with a group of young men, boys, from the ages of 14 to 18, and they were from an area of Belfast called Tigers Bay. Now, the minute you would hear the name Tigers Bay, if you're from this part of the world, something will arise within you, which will either be, oh, great place, lovely people, or, oh, they're different from me, and I need to be careful. And so I was asked to deliver this particular workshop with these young guys, and it took a little bit of conversation within my head in order to be confident enough about doing it. And I said yes to it, and I delivered the workshop, and it went really, really well. And I was very mindful of not letting them know where I was from because I was afraid of what might happen.
Okay.
It all went really, really well. And on our final day, which was on the Sunday, I said to them, as part of our closing, I said, guys, there's something I'd like to share with you now that we've spent the weekend together, and that is that I'm a Catholic from Strabane. And they said, sure, we knew that the minute we saw you. From the accent, from some of the language, they had picked up on it from very early in the weekend, as much as I thought I might have been keeping it a secret from them. That's one example, and I think it would be fair to say that you would kind of know from the people you were meeting and where they're from, again, whether or not, am I going to be okay or am I not going to be okay?
Yeah, so that was always going on for us, wasn't it?
Always going on. But you know from how different words the people use, how they pronounce different words, different letters, from somebody's name, Paddy.
You said different letters, so common throughout the north of Ireland. So tell me a couple of names that you would know instantly if you met a bloke and his name was
Paddy.
that you would think, oh, hang on, I need to think about this. So if it was Paddy, if you met Paddy, you're thinking straight away, what are you feeling?
Paddy's probably a Catholic.
And you're safe?
He's safe.
Is that what you're thinking, feeling? Okay.
William? No. William will be a Protestant. And here comes the stereotypes. William's a big Protestant from a big orange family, blah, 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 blah. That's the stereotypes that come up. These are not true, but these would be the initial things that would come up. Yeah, like those are two examples. You have a name like mine, Stephen. It's probably safe enough. Kevin, probably leaning a wee bit more towards Catholic, would be fair to say. So that was a big one. Where you live, even within cities like Belfast, you name where somebody's from, or you ask somebody where they're from, you'll figure out whether they're Protestant or Catholic, nationalist, unionist, safe or not safe. You ask somebody what school they went to. So maybe somebody lived somewhere where it's a wee bit more vague, you're not too sure. Then you could ask them what school. If it's got I went to St. Coleman's or St. Mary's, very high chance that you're now speaking to a Catholic. If they went to, I think, maybe you could correct me, like grammar schools, academies, probably Protestant, but there might be other indicators. Even if somebody worked or didn't work, at one time the shipyards in Belfast, I'm going back much further than my time now, of course, but at one time, seeing a Catholic work in the shipyards wasn't something that occurred. There might have been some. I think about my father trying to get a job for many years in the ambulance service. Couldn't get one. They just weren't available to Catholics in many ways. So lots of subtle ways of being able to spot the difference.
Mm.
And again, I for me, it's always, am I okay or am I not okay?
Yeah, so that was always going on for us, that nervous system sensing of safety or not safety. Am I okay or not okay? I remember that. And luckily, Stephen, like yourself, my parents, similar. I didn't have a very ostracized or sectarian upbringing, but still, you had to know who you were speaking to, where they were from, were you safe? You're going to a party or going to someone's house. What area was this? How am I getting in there? How am I getting out? And tell me a little bit then about how that informed your beliefs around yourself and your beliefs around other people, and maybe even, I wouldn't say the world at large, because we're talking about the north of Ireland at large. What did you start to believe? What formed in you, those early years?
Really good question, Kevin.
Hmm.
So I remember when I'd gone to that mixed school, that my granda, God rest him, he would have come out with comments like, "Oh, you'll have to get a bowler hat," because it was, again, remember, it was mostly a Protestant school, so he was saying things like you'd have to get a bowler hat and an orange sash to fit in. So he was referring to the Orange Order and the Orange Order, what it represented, and saying that that was the only way that I could fit in a predominantly Protestant school. Now, I actually look back at that and think, you know what? He served that up as banter, and yet there was probably some sort of element of a truth within it for him. And yet it was something that I was able to take in my stride.
Mhm.
So it wasn't something that was called. I certainly don't remember being upset. I more remember laughing it off. And so there's a wee bit of, I think, for me about being able to navigate different worlds, which meant that I was, in a way, able to read people, pay attention to people, and see what needs to be done to make everything okay.
Mhm.
And there's a wider context of my background around that, but it certainly contributed to this ability of being able to integrate myself into groups
Mhm.
and be okay with them. So it was kind of like an acquired skill that has served me really well in working with people. And say most of my work over the last 30 odd years has been with groups of people. And so being able to integrate and support and move with people. So, and I think the experience of going through different schools and different communities, in a way, it really supported me seeing that maybe it sounds a bit cliche, but everybody's doing the best that they can. There's so many different opposing sides and ideas, and you look at conflicts that are happening all around the world, and with the big conflicts which get all the media attention, then there's smaller conflicts, the conflicts within families, conflicts within communities, within businesses, within organizations. And there are all these conflicts going on. And somehow or other in my teenage years, my experiences, I think, really helped me see that there's never one story, there's never one truth. And it doesn't matter if I believe something to be the truth, somebody else can have the exact same level of belief in their truth. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. I can look at statistics and read things about who started what and who started when and who did this and who did that. And the bottom line is people today will still be living with their truth, what's right for them.
Stephen, can I pause you a second and just pull a question out there, if that's okay?
Hmm.
Thank you. I'm just really curious because I hear you leaning now on the wisdom of the man that you are, the experience that you have as you look back on that experience.
Hmm.
Uh, and if I could jump forward to the wisdom of the man that you are and ask you to reflect with that wisdom, if someone came to you and they were saying things like always on alert, always checking, am I safe? Always trying to work out, do I fit in? Always being cautious of what I say, who do I speak to? Is this other person safe? What do you suggest might be happening in their nervous system and in their body?
Well, I would say that their nervous system would have been working very, very hard.
Mm,
Keep it in very simple terms. Would have been working very, very hard for them, rightly so, and that.
so why wasn't yours? And the point I'm making, Stephen, is how we people from here, how we normalize this. We just got through and you just worked it
Mhm.
out and you knew how to do it and you got on. But when you think of someone else with that trying to be safe and what was going on in their nervous system, why don't we see that in ourselves?
Well, this is this is the big part of compassion and inquiry, isn't it? Where we use the example of another child, where we're able to have compassion and empathy for somebody else's experiences. Yet it's often harder to look at ourselves with that same lens, with that same heart. And at the same time, like I've had family killed during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I'll never forget the day or the night that Mum came into the bedroom where Sean and I were. I think Dad had phoned and our cousin had been shot by the British Army.
Mm.
I'll never forget that. I had no idea what was going on, really. I could look it up. I think it was 7 or 8. I was young, maybe 9. I only actually remember meeting my cousin a couple of times. He was much older than me, you know. But that's there, the emotion. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but it's there. I can feel it,
Absolutely, I can hear it.
but it's still there and it's still processing. And that's going back 35, 40 years now. And so, in a way, when I grew up, I was very fortunate that where I lived, my home and my house with my mum and dad was quite safe. It was a safe place to be. I had an extended family that of course, as adults, I know that we're never perfect, but overall it was quite safe. So there was that level of safety there. And at the same time, when I was out at school, like I remember being in that mixed school and being called a Fenian, a derogatory term for a Catholic. I remember being told, we're going to take you around the back of the school and beat you with a wrench. I remember those times. But I think what was helpful was being able to go home and have a sense of, I'm okay here. I would not have known all of this in any way. I wouldn't have thought about it. I certainly wouldn't have, as a teenager, I never told mum and dad about those things at school. I didn't want them to worry. I sort of took that on as myself. Um, so of course, everything has an impact. And then there are people that grew up in parts in areas where there was regular fighting. We have what we call peace walls in Belfast, which separated, talking about apartheid, was to keep everybody safe, but it separated people.
And just for reference, Stephen, they're still there. They're still there.
They're still there.
Mm.
They're still there. When you're living in those sort of interfaces where it's, in many ways, the segregation kept me more removed so that there was a community around. But once I started to move out of that, then things became more and more apparent. All the way through primary school, people in the schoolyard would have probably talked about the IRA and the Brits and the Provos using all of the slag terms. But I was probably oblivious to most of it. I didn't really know what was what, in fairness. So in a way, there was a cushion there until the age of 11. And then whenever I left that community, not completely, but when I was starting to go out further into the world and interacting with people in different ways, that's when I started to learn more about this is okay and this is not okay. That's when I would have experienced my nervous state being in heightened states of freeze or fight or fright. And for me, I'd say most of it was fright. And certainly that time, first time in Belfast, it was fright.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's there in the nervous system. I don't know if I answered your question there or not.
I don't even know if I asked one, Stephen, but it was beautiful to listen to you paint that real picture. And I think for me, the point that I was trying to get you to put across, that you were explaining so beautifully, was that we lived in a state of heightened tension, whether we knew it or not, or whether we accepted it or not. That's how We lived here for a long, long, long time. Even people like you who were cushioned, was the term you used, a little bit from it. You still knew not to go to certain places and not to say certain things and do certain things and be with certain people, to be on the lookout, to watch out for things. You knew. And one thing I just want to clarify, Stephen, and then I want to pull you forward if that's okay. This idea of schooling by apartheid. So we had Catholic, very generalized thing, Catholic schools and Protestant schools. And then in the middle, a little bit, there was what we called integrated schools or mixed schools. And some people chose to go to the mixed school as a way of not buying into the schooling by apartheid system. And I heard you say that your mum and dad sent you to the mixed school in inverted commas to sort of, are you saying to pull you out of this segregated school system? Or was it just a handy school, or was it just close by, or did they believe that they were doing a
No, it wasn't handy, but there was also a wider context of that. Like I wanted to go to a grammar school.
and let's pause there because again, I'm really conscious. So not only did we have a school by apartheid separating kids by religion, but we also have and still have a school that separated kids by ability. So there was a secondary school, which was for kids that, let's just say, weren't very bright, according to the metrics by which they were being measured. And then there was a school for kids who were the bright kids, and that was called a grammar school. So you wanted to go to the grammar school, the school for the brighter kids.
Yeah, and I had three choices. I had two choices, and then my mum was more in favor of the school that I went to, and that's the one that I ended up going to. I don't need to go into the reasons. There were other reasons why I didn't go to the first two choices, but
Yeah.
both of those were Catholic.
Yeah. So we're separating kids across religious backgrounds, across parent educational ability. And sorry, we weren't doing this. We are doing this because we're still doing this right now. And when we think about and class, yeah, and class, we think about
Mhm.
community and connection and
And class.
tribe and all of those things that we might refer to in compassionate inquiry. The system that put kids through school in the north of Ireland seems to be opposing all of those at every level. Now, that's just worth pausing around, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's just worth recognizing. Yeah, that's still
Mhm.
that's not 1979 or 1984 you're talking about. That's today. That's like right now, you know.
Still today.
We wonder how we are going to resolve and integrate our communities when we have a schooling system that still works on religious, class, and academic ability. So let me pause that there because again, that's a conversation that could be a whole, a whole conversation. I'm interested. A few moments ago, Stephen, you talked about when I was 19, I was leading a group of kids from Tigers Bay on a weekend. So already by 19, you're getting into this sort of work, this work that's dealing with whether you knew it or not. Were those terms there dealing with trauma, dealing with, or were those terms being used when you were 19 or?
No, we weren't talking about trauma then because I was doing my work with young people at risk and juvenile offenders and adult offenders. At that time, there was a lot of money invested. So, 96, you had the peace process, the Good Friday Agreement. And then following that, there was a lot of investment in terms of grants from the European Union to support the building of peace. And so I certainly worked for many organizations that were able to utilize that money. And a lot of it was about how do we get kids together? And it probably wasn't much of a bigger plan than that. Let's get kids together. If we get them together, we'll start to see there's things in common as well as things in difference, and that they can all be okay. And that's a very blasé way of speaking about it. There was more to it than that. Things like trauma were not talked about. Kids that were misbehaving were just called little shits. That's like that's it. The work has certainly the work has evolved over the last 30 odd years.
again, pausing there. So we just spoke really in depth, and you've been really open about, living here and on high alert. And if it wasn't your nervous system, if it was someone else's, what would be going on for them? And, fast forward, and we throw a lot of kids together from these opposite communities or opposing communities or different communities. And I was referencing Resma Manikim and my grandmother's hands. And, he talks about white body, black body, and police body. And I was suggesting that in the north of Ireland here, we could, loosely, and I don't want to be dismissive of Resma's book or the work that he's doing, but I kind of feel that we could loosely translate black body, white body, police body into Catholic body, Protestant body, and police body for the north of Ireland. I think that would be a fair enough thing. And Resma was talking about that these communities need to heal individually before we push them together, because taking two traumatized communities and pushing them together to heal together, he's suggesting is a recipe for disaster. What's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on that early trauma work in the north of Ireland and bringing these communities together? And maybe as you were doing there, just referencing how that might be done today.
Even going back then, I think both were happening at the same time. So I talked about a single identity workshop that I ran for those young guys. It wasn't designed that it would be a Catholic leading it, but it was more just that was a circumstance, and that was the best that we could do at that time. Ideally, that would have been delivered by somebody from the Protestant community. So it seemed that both were happening at the same time. The individual community work, single community work, as well as the wider community work. And I think that's still ongoing. But we used to run a program with the probation board called Watershed. And the young men that came on that program, they were kind of at the stage where they were going to do some serious time for the things that they were doing.
You mean jail time, incarceration? Yeah.
Jail time.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this program was presented to them as, you do this program or you go to jail. Now they consistently said, we have no choice. We have to do this program or we go to jail. And we consistently said, well, there's still a choice there. You just don't like the other choice. You're still making a choice to be here. That was one of the messages that we worked with them, that there was always a choice. Even a good choice, a bad choice, there's still a choice. Now, what was interesting, we ran that program for a year at a time. And every program on the final, there was 3 residentials per program. And every program on the final residential, things went the way they shouldn't go. We had young people turning up with alcohol or drugs. We had fights, damage to buildings, setting fires to buildings, everything that you could do to cause some, I don't know what the word is, but it was certainly causing something to happen that resulted in that residential being cancelled partway through, usually on the first night. I say partway through, but usually it was on the first night. And what was happening? Well, what we put it down to was this was the end of the program. And once this program ended, those young people were going back to their same communities, to their same families, where they didn't have safety, where they didn't have people that could look out for them. They didn't have somewhere that was safe. And by acting out at the end of the program meant that they got to stay in it a little bit longer.
Okay.
Really, really smart what was happening.
So if I misbehave, I get pulled back into this program again, and I get staying with people like Stephen Brown and other people who are safe, helpful, kind, who will look after me.
Who will look after me.
Okay.
One of the things that I enjoyed about that work the most, Kevin, was to see these young guys, 15, 16 years of age, and they would turn up, and they were the toughest little street kids you can meet. They would cut you down with their words, with their eyes. They would take no nonsense from you. They were being the big lads, as they would say. And you see the moment with time when they let go of that and they laughed and smiled like the little boys that they were. That was the goal for me. because that was where you're saying you're nervous. Now it's I didn't know nervous systems then, but that's the moment where you say your nervous system is now settled. There's nothing like laughter to know that you're regulated and you're in the present moment. And that's what we were creating with these young boys. But we didn't know the jargon that there is today. But it was happening.
So thinking of what you know now, and the work that you've done, and you've worked extensively with compassionate inquiry and in our mentorship program and facilitation, and I don't think it would be unfair to say, you're one of the lead hands in guiding the ship that is compassionate inquiry. And you've worked extensively with internal family systems with Richard Schwartz. You've worked extensively with somatic experiencing and Peter Levine. You've worked extensively with Gestalt, and you've just talked beautifully about the north of Ireland and a little bit about the nervous system and what was going on then, and how the work that you were doing was moving people through that post-conflict trauma body that we didn't call it then. If we could show the world and other places a way forward through conflict, and you also mentioned conflict in families, conflict in communities, conflict in societies, what could the rest of the world learn from us as you look through the lens that you now have of this person with all this experience?
There's a couple of things. So, Kevin, a big part of my work, my private practice that I work with people, I talk about the 4 C's of connection. So you have connection with self. So who am I? What's going on within me, and so on. I talk about connection with community. We work with connection with the environment that we're in. And then the 4th C of connection is connection with something that's not really tangible, something that's greater, whatever that means to people, whether that's God or spirit or whatever it is. And for me, these pillars are crucial for all of us to navigate the world, to survive in the world. How do we support people have more of these moments of being in connection with themselves in the present moment, more moments of being in connection with their communities, with the environment, and I don't mean talking, when I say environment, it's like being able to put your hands on the dirt to, and of course, in different parts of the world, this is harder and it's more challenging, but can we pause and look at the sky? Can we have a sense of wonder of what's around us? Many of us are so disconnected from all of these things, whether it's post-conflict, in conflict, any aspect of being human. Connection is so important. And that's the one thing that I think, it's how do we develop that? And I think a lot of it needs to be at grassroots level. So again, if I look at what was happening in Northern Ireland, a lot of the investment, these grants, they were put into community organizations. How do we look after people? How do we bring people in our community together? How do we give them a space that's theirs? And it's gradual work. The other side of it is we're 30 years past the Good Friday Agreement in the north of Ireland, in Northern Ireland. We're 30 years past it.
Which was the watershed of supposedly, just for reference for people, end of conflict. So we're 30 years post-conflict. Okay.
And we still have conflict. It's not the same way, largely. We certainly don't have the same, or we don't have the murders and the bombs that were going on. There's still some going on, but generally speaking, it's a much different country today, and there are still conflicts. There is still bitterness between communities, and then
how could compassionate inquiry help that, Stephen? What if you could steer that ship I referred to earlier, steer the ship compassionate inquiry towards the north of Ireland? How could it help?
On a few levels, I think sitting with a compassionate inquiry practitioner is very good for your nervous system. So being able to ground and settle into the present moment to regulate is one aspect of it. I think we do great work in compassionate inquiry looking at perspectives. So can we have a different perspective? They looked at me this way because I'm a Catholic, that's a, or they looked at me this way because I'm a Protestant and whatever. There are always so many different perspectives because we're using our stories to make sense of things in ways that we're not intending them not to be helpful, but they end up being not helpful at best, not helpful. I think the work in compassion and inquiry, of course, in general, is about can we have more compassion in the world, more understanding of the other, and the idea of doing personal work. So what's going on for me and how can I show up in a different way? In the context of the north of Ireland, there's so many stories that are undercurrents of beliefs for people,
Sure.
And there's so much of I'm not wanted on both sides of the community. It's much more larger than both sides of the community, but there's this I'm not wanted, there's something wrong with me. Neither side belongs anywhere,
Hmm.
and yet they're both fighting or have been fighting, still are fighting in different ways to belong somewhere. But nobody really knows what it is that they're fighting for. I think there's a song lyric about that, in reality. And so for people here, there's something wrong with me, I think is a core belief.
I would absolutely agree.
For the larger community of Northern Ireland. And it's certainly there for me. And that core belief, I think, is there within us for many, many different reasons. There's many things in our childhood that will bring us to that core belief. But I think it's there when people want to be part of something and they can't be part of it. There's something wrong with me.
I just want to say again, though, those four pillars, because I thought that was really beautiful. You talked about connection to self, connection to community, connection to environment, and connection to something greater than you. If we as compassionate inquiry people can move out into the world helping others understand or gain a connection to self, community, environment, or something greater than you, yeah, I get a real sense of hope from that. That would be a beautiful thing. And I'm gonna ask you one final question, and I'm gonna say to you, you're not allowed to answer it with the conversation we've just had. All right, so I'm caveating your answer. I'm blocking off one part of your answer. If there was something that Stephen Brown could teach the world, what would that be?
You're touching onto my beliefs now, Kevin, of what would I have to share with somebody that would be wise enough. Um, Ram Dass is one of my favorite teachers. He says, I'm going to say it my way. Forget about Ram Dass. Be kind, tell the truth.
Beautiful. And I was just about to invite you to drop out of your head and into your heart for that answer. And I think that's what you did naturally. I think you were searching for the wise, the smart thing to say.
Yeah.
Be kind, and
Tell the truth.
tell the truth. And maybe given we're on a Ram Dass ending, would it be okay if I add one of Ram Dass's, which I absolutely love, and I think you'll enjoy this one too because I know you well.
Go for it.
He says, "This work is far too important to take seriously."
Mm.
Stephen Brown.
And in the words of the Joker from the Batman movies, why so serious?
Yeah, maybe in this trauma work, Stephen, maybe when we're disconnected from self and disconnected from community and environment, and when we're not connected to something greater than us, and we've lived through fear and conflict and segregation and separation, that it all gets very tight and tense, as Gabor would say, all gets very restricted and our views get very limited. And yeah, why so serious?
Exactly.
Be kind and tell the truth. Stephen Brown, it has been an absolute delight to get to sit in your company for an hour. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks a million.
So thank you for listening to another episode of the podcast, The Gift of Trauma from Compassionate Inquiry. You might wonder why Stephen and I talk about schooling by apartheid, which is a comment that I didn't use lightly. I don't use lightly, but I do believe it's true. And giving evidence to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee recently, David Holloway, who is the Director of Community Dialogue, he commented, segregated housing and education is obscene 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement. More than 90% of schools in Northern Ireland are still segregated by religion. That went on recently, talking about what's happening in Northern Ireland right now, today. And I just want to give you some context from reports undertaken by Queen's University in Belfast and the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee that Northern Ireland has higher levels of mental health than any other region in the UK. 1 in 5 adults and around 45,000 children here have a mental health problem at any one time. 318 suicides were registered in Northern Ireland in 2015, and that's the highest since records began in 1970, and an increase from 2014, a 19% increase. An estimated 61% of the Northern Ireland adult population have experienced a traumatic event at some point in their lifetime. 61%. The most prevalent chronic conditions among those who experienced a conflict-related traumatic event were back and neck pain, persistent headaches, arthritis, or rheumatism. So given what's happening in the north of Ireland right now, and given its relationship to a hugely traumatic past, we think it's important to have this conversation. And thank you for tuning in to The Gift of Trauma from Compassionate Inquiry.
The Gifts of Trauma is a weekly podcast that features personal stories of trauma healing, transformation, and the gifts revealed on the path to authenticity. Please note, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for personal therapy or a DIY formula for self-therapy. We'd like to thank you for being here today, and we'd also like to thank our guests, as well as Gabor Mate, Sataram Kaur, and the Compassionate Inquiry admin team, marketing team, and podcast team. Please join us again next week to hear more stories of transformation and healing through Compassionate Inquiry.